Hello there, and welcome to another slow, soothing episode of Boring History for Sleep. Before we begin tonight's long, gentle journey into the past, take a moment to settle in. Pull up your blanket, maybe fluff your pillow just right. Find a quiet, warm space where your thoughts can drift. And while you're here, if you're enjoying these sleepy stories, go ahead and subscribe. It helps this channel keep telling history the way it was really lived. Slowly, quietly, and sometimes a little uncomfortably. Feel free to leave a comment, too. Tell me where you're listening from. Whether it's a cold dorm room, a quiet bedroom, or somewhere halfway across the world. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from tonight. Alright, let your mind soften. Let the day fall away. Because tonight, we're going back to the Viking Age. Not to sail or raid or fight, but to live. To feel what it was really like to be you. If you'd been born 1,000 years ago, not as a legend, but as an ordinary soul with mud on your boots, aches in your back, and very little mead to go around. This is the quiet truth behind the myths. This is why you'd regret being a Viking farmer. And more. Imagine waking up before the sun has even touched the edge of the sky. It's cold. So cold, in fact, that your breath curls like smoke in the air, even inside your house. You're lying on a pile of straw, with a thin wool blanket wrapped around your shoulders. The fire burned out during the night. Your fingers are stiff. Your nose is numb. This isn't just any winter. This is winter in Viking Age Scandinavia, more than 1,000 years ago. You are a farmer, not a warrior, not a chieftain, just a regular person living in a world of stone, wood, and endless work. Your house is long and low. It's called a longhouse, and you share it with your entire family. Your parents, maybe your grandparents, definitely your siblings. And then the animals. Yes, animals live inside with you. Goats, maybe a cow, a few chickens, and a pig or two. In the dark, earthy-smelling back half of the house, they rest in their pens. Their warmth helps keep the house from freezing, but it doesn't make things exactly pleasant. The smell of hay, sweat, and waste hangs thick in the air. But you've lived in it so long, it barely registers anymore. There are no windows. Only a hole in the roof where smoke from the central hearth escapes. When the fire is going, at least. Right now, the hearth is cold. You'll have to relight it. That means trudging outside to fetch damp wood, brushing snow off the pile, and blowing gently into a flickering spark until the smoke curls up once more. Breakfast? If you're lucky, there's some barley porridge left from the night before. It's thick and lumpy, with a few dried berries or salted fish bits stirred in for flavor. The bread is hard. The milk tastes slightly sour, but it fills your stomach. The chores begin as the sky turns from black to a misty gray. You carry buckets of water from the nearby stream, unless it's frozen, in which case you chip at the ice with a blunt iron axe. You feed the animals. You mend fences that the wind keeps knocking over. You patch the roof with turf. You turn the soil in the small plot of land behind your house. The ground here is rocky and tough. The growing season is short. Most of the food you plant will barely last the winter. Barley, turnips, cabbage, beans. If your family owns a sheep, you'll have wool for clothing, but first you must shear, clean, spin, and weave it yourself. Even in summer, the work never stops. You must dry fish, cure meats, gather firewood, and repair tools. There's no store, no delivery, no break. If you don't do the work, you don't eat. If you're a boy, you may learn to hunt or carve wood. If you're a girl, you help your mother with spinning, cooking, and fetching. There is no school. Only skills passed down from hands that have worked the same tasks for generations. And yet, your day is not without its moments of rest. In the evening, your family gathers around the hearth. Someone might hum a song. Your grandmother might tell a tale of Odin, the All-Father, or of Thor and his mighty hammer. You watch the fire and feel the warmth return to your cheeks. Outside, the wind howls. The stars blink in a black sky. There is no clock, no electric light, no cars. Just the sound of animals shifting in the straw and the flickering dance of flames on the timber walls. Some nights there are guests, neighbors, a traveling skald, a storyteller. He tells of far-off lands, of raids, of gold and glory. You listen eyes wide. Maybe one day you'll leave the farm, sail away, see something beyond mud and frost. But not today, not this week, not this season. Tomorrow you'll wake up to fetch water again, to gather dung for the fire, to kneel in the field and pull at weeds with your fingers raw and cold. You are a Viking, but not a raider, not a king. You are a farmer, and it's not glorious. It's not epic. It's hard. You sleep near animals. You eat the same porridge every day. You work from dawn to dusk, and then some. You've never seen a map. You've never seen a city. You've never had the time. And yet, in the quiet rhythm of your life, there is something strangely peaceful. A stillness. The whisper of wind through pine trees. The crunch of frost beneath your boots. The creak of wood in the beams overhead. This is what it truly meant to be Viking. Not the battles. Not the ships. But the field. The cold. The never-ending work. And tomorrow, it begins again. Now, we turn from the quiet world of the common Viking farmer to a man who is anything but ordinary. Imagine a figure tall and strange, with deep-set eyes and a stormy expression. His words could move kings. His sword could silence men. And his moods? They could shake a whole room. This was Egil Skallagrimsson, a Viking warrior, a poet, and by many accounts, perhaps even a little mad. He lived in the 900s in Iceland, when it was still a rough, fresh settlement carved from lava fields and frost. He was born into a powerful family, descended from settlers who had left Norway to escape a king's control. His father, Skallagrim, was strong and quiet. Egil was not. He wrote poems as a child. Fierce, complex, clever ones. But he also killed a boy during a game, when he was just 7. In Viking culture, this wasn't unheard of. Still, even then, Egil stood out. He was moody, proud, and unusually gifted with words. You see, in Viking society, poetry was power. A good poem could make a king weep or a warrior pause. Poets, called skalds, were respected, even feared. Egil's poems were sharp, filled with hidden meanings and clever word games. And unlike many warriors, he wrote them about himself. As he grew, so did his legend. He sailed the seas. He fought in battles. He argued with kings. He drank heavily. He made enemies easily. There's one story where Egil and his men are invited to a feast by a Norwegian king named Eirik Bloodaxe. But Egil, already in trouble for previous misdeeds, knows this might be a trap. Still, he goes. During the feast, a cup of poisoned ale is handed to him. Instead of drinking it, Egil carves magical runes into the cup. Runes meant to break the poison spell. The cup shatters. The poison spills. Egil survives. Later that same night, he composes a poem so powerful, so perfectly crafted, that King Eirik, who had every reason to execute him, spares his life instead. That's the kind of man Egil was. Dangerous. Brilliant. Loud. But there's another side to him. One that's quiet. Gentle, even. Later in life, Egil's young son drowned at sea. It broke something in him. He didn't eat. He didn't sleep. His family feared for him. But then he wrote a poem. A long, sorrowful piece called Sonneturek, The Loss of a Son. It's one of the oldest personal poems in Norse literature. In it, Egil speaks of grief, of fate, of how the gods had failed him. The words are quiet, heavy, beautiful. They show a man not just of violence, but of deep feeling. You can still imagine him there, an old man, sitting alone by the fire, whispering verses into the darkness while the sea crashes outside. He lived a long life. He outlived his enemies. He kept writing, even as his body slowed. Some say he asked to be buried with his sword. Others believe his bones were found centuries later, hidden beneath a church floor. Egil was many things, brilliant, brutal, misunderstood. A man who used poetry the way others used weapons. A man with his name carved into the stones of Viking history. And yet, he also reminds us that even in a harsh world, where winters were long and the work never ended, there was still time for beauty, for reflection, for grief, for art. In the quiet after a storm, a poem could be more lasting than an axe. And in Egil's case, it was. Let's step now into a different kind of silence, the deep, still quiet of earth and stone. We are no longer beside a fire, or in a crowded longhouse, or standing before a chieftain's hall. We are walking across a grassy mound, one that holds secrets from over 1,000 years ago. Beneath your feet lies something ancient. A ship buried deep in the soil. A Viking ship, not left in the sea, but placed carefully into the earth, like a coffin for a person who once sailed the waves. These are Viking ship burials, one of the most puzzling, beautiful, and haunting practices from the Norse world. You see, not all Vikings were buried this way. Most were not. The vast majority, especially poor farmers like you met earlier, were cremated or buried in small, simple graves with just a few tools or beads beside them. But for the wealthy, for the powerful, for the people who mattered in Viking society, death could be more elaborate. Imagine the scene. A ship, real and seaworthy, is pulled ashore for the last time. Its sail has been removed, its hull scrubbed clean. Into this ship, they place the dead. Not lying flat, but surrounded by goods. Weapons, jewelry, tools, and sometimes sacrificed animals. Horses, dogs, even birds. Some ships contained women, some men, and some both. The most famous of these burials was found in a place called Oseberg in Norway. It was discovered in 1904, and what they found there stunned even the most careful archaeologists. 2 women lay in the ship. One was older, perhaps in her 70s, very rare for the time. The other younger, around 50. They were buried with sleds, wooden carts, carved animal heads, silk, spindles, and tools for weaving. There were also sacrificed animals. And food. Lots of it. The ship itself was beautifully carved, serpents twisting along the prow, the wood darkened with time. Whoever these women were, they had been important. Maybe priestesses. Maybe nobles. Maybe something in between. But the mystery remains. Who were they really? Why 2? Why so many objects? And why a ship? Well, in Norse belief, the sea was not just a place. It was a path, a road to the afterlife. Some believed that when a person died, they journeyed to a realm called Hell, a cold, gray place. Others hoped for Valhalla, the warrior's hall. Either way, the ship was seen as a way to cross over, to travel from the land of the living to whatever lay beyond. Not all ship burials involved real ships. Some were made using stones laid in the shape of a vessel. Others were mounds shaped like overturned boats. The idea was symbolic. What mattered was the journey. And still more mysteries remain. In some burials, the dead were cremated before being placed in the ship. In others, entire crews were buried together. At times, graves were robbed not long after the funeral. Whether by thieves or enemies, we don't know. And in at least one case, found at Somme in Estonia, a ship contained warriors with weapons but no goods. They had died violently, far from home. Maybe a failed raid. Maybe a lost battle. Their story is still half hidden in the dirt. We can only imagine the ceremony. The low chants. The flickering torches. The smell of pine and salt and fire. A ship slowly covered in stones and soil. A sail fluttering one last time in the wind. And then silence. Over the centuries, grass grows. Trees take root. People forget. Until one day a farmer digs into a mound and finds an oar. A spark of the past, brought to light again. Viking ship burials remind us that even in harsh times, people cared deeply about death. About memory. About sending their loved ones off in honor and mystery. They also show us that the Vikings were not only warriors or farmers, but storytellers. Believers in journeys. Builders of rituals that crossed the sea, the sky, and the soil. Even in death they traveled. And beneath the earth, their ships still wait. Now, let us rise from the quiet of the earth and step into firelight once again. But this time, we are not among farmers or forgotten graves. Tonight, you are a guest at the long hall of a jarl, a Viking noble. A chieftain, one of the powerful few. The air is thick with warmth and the smell of roasted meat. Torches flicker along the timber walls, casting long, dancing shadows. Furs are draped over benches. Iron pots simmer over open hearths. Wooden beams arch high above your head, and in every corner, there is motion. You are far from the muddy fields now. This is a feast, a gathering of the elite. Warriors, poets, servants, guests from distant lands. They all gather beneath one roof. It is loud but not unpleasant. A deep hum of conversation, clinking cups, and the occasional burst of laughter. At the head of the hall sits the jarl, dressed in fine wool, trimmed with fur. He holds a horn filled with mead, a golden drink made from honey and water, fermented until strong and sweet. Mead flows freely tonight. So does ale. Cups are rarely empty. The food is better than you've ever seen on a farm. Trenches of bread serve as plates, soaking up the juices of meat. There's roasted lamb, boiled beef, and fish baked with herbs. Bowls of barley porridge are flavored with onions and wild garlic. Flatbreads are stacked in baskets. Sometimes even apples, dried and wrinkled from winter storage, are passed around. At the center of the feast is the main dish, perhaps a whole pig, slowly roasted over hours, its skin crisp and golden. Servants cut thick slices and lay them on wide wooden boards. Steam rises in gentle waves. The smell is rich, comforting, a mix of smoke and spice. But food is not the only attraction here. Feasts in the Viking world were about status, about showing your wealth, your power, your generosity. A jarl who threw a good feast was respected. One who did not was mocked. There are rules, too, even if they seem hidden beneath the noise. The jarl sits highest, his family beside him. Guests are seated by rank, by favor, by fame. Poets and warriors are honored. Servants move quietly through the room, refilling cups and removing bones. At some point, a skald, a professional poet, stands to recite a tale. Perhaps a saga of old heroes. Perhaps a poem praising the jarl himself. Everyone listens, politely, even if they've heard it before. Gifts may be exchanged. A fine sword, a decorated cloak, a silver brooch carved with serpents. These are not random, they carry meaning. Symbolic gestures of loyalty, trade, or alliance. But under the surface of all this warmth, there is tension. Who sits closest to the fire? Who speaks most? Who stays silent? In Viking society, honor is everything, and insults, real or imagined, can lead to revenge. Even at a feast, people watch their words. As the night stretches on, the mead takes hold. Some guests grow loud. A few sleep where they sit. The fire dims. A servant gently places more logs on the embers. You, seated further from the jarl, are content to eat slowly. The food is rich but heavy. You sip your drink and let your thoughts drift. How different this life is from the farmers. Here, meat is plenty. Warmth is constant. The roof does not leak. Yet it comes with risk. Power is fragile, and enemies gather quickly. The jarl's life is full, yes, but never simple. Eventually, someone begins to hum a lullaby. Others join. It is soft, slow, and familiar. A song of the sea, of home. And as the fire flickers lower, the voices become fewer. The hall quiets. Outside, frost begins to form on the grass. Stars blink overhead. Inside, the last of the feast cools on wooden plates. Tomorrow there will be politics, decisions, and the endless pull of power. But tonight there is peace, and food, and fire, and the slow, steady rhythm of stories shared beneath timber beams. As the fires of the jarl's feast fade into ash, we step away from power and comfort and return to the middle path of Viking life. Not enslaved, not noble, somewhere in between. You are what they call a bondi. It sounds impressive, free, respected, a landowner. And yes, technically, you are all those things. You're not a slave. You have your own farm. You can even attend public meetings called the Thing, where decisions are made and justice is given. But freedom in the Viking Age is not simple. And being a bondi, one of the free men, comes with its own quiet struggles. Your land is small. It belongs to your family, and you are expected to protect it, to grow food on it, to pass it to your children. The land is rocky. The soil is thin. You work it with wooden tools reinforced by iron, when you can afford it. Each season brings its own demands. In spring, you plow and plant. In summer, you weed and mend. In autumn, you harvest and store. In winter, you survive. And always there are taxes. You owe grain or livestock to the local jarl. If you fish near his waters, you give him part of your catch. If he calls a levy, you may have to sail with him to raid a distant coast, whether you want to or not. Your freedom exists, but it is tightly woven with duty. Imagine your daily life. You wake before the sun. The hearth has cooled overnight. Your children are still asleep on straw mats near the wall. You slip outside, feet crunching over frost-covered ground. You chop wood. You check traps. You milk the cow, if you're lucky enough to have one. You turn the compost heap. You patch a roof tile that blew loose in the wind. And all of this before breakfast. Your clothes are wool, rough and thick. Your shoes are stitched leather, soaked through at the toes. Your hands are cracked from cold and work. But this is how it has always been. At midday, you might visit a neighbor to trade. A bit of cheese for some flax. A clay bowl for an extra knife. Money is rare. Most trade is done in kind. You may even go to the Thing, the local assembly where disputes are settled. But even there, your voice is quieter than those of the richer men. You can speak, yes. But whether you're heard depends on who you are. And yet, you take pride in what you have. Your longhouse stands on your land. Your goats know your voice. Your family eats every day, barely, but enough. You've taught your son how to mend a fishing net. Your daughter can grind grain with skill and speed. There's also honor in your name. In Viking society, names matter. Your family's history is carved in memory and shared aloud in sagas. You hope to pass on more than land. You hope to pass on pride. But always, life as a bondi is about balance. Work hard, and maybe you'll gather enough grain for winter. Get lucky, and the jarl won't demand too much. Speak carefully and avoid disputes. Show respect but not weakness. Defend your family, but don't start a feud. You are free but watched. You are respected but replaceable. And at night, as you sit near the fire, feet aching, listening to the wind howl outside your turf walls, you think of other lives. The Jarls full of feasts and gifts. The thralls full of silence and command. And yours somewhere between. Not grand. Not easy. But real. You wrap your cloak tighter. The children have fallen asleep. The dog snores gently near the door. You stare at the fire and feel the warmth on your cheeks. You are a Bondi, and tomorrow the rhythm begins again. Now drift with me again into another kind of life. One that began early. One where choices were made for you. You are not a warrior. You are not a farmer. You are not yet grown. And yet, your life is about to change. You are 12 years old, and you are about to be married. You live in a small settlement, maybe in Iceland, or perhaps along the windswept fjords of Norway. The longhouse smells of smoke and wool. Outside, gulls cry over a gray sky. Inside, your mother has been weaving for weeks. A fine dress, a wedding cloak, carefully spun, hand-dyed. It is not fancy, but it is yours. You have known this was coming. Girls often married young in the Viking world, sometimes as early as 12 or 13. Boys a little later. These were not matches of love or poetry. They were decisions, made by families to form alliances, trade land, or secure peace between rival clans. You have seen your future husband once. He is older, maybe 15, maybe 20. His family owns more sheep than yours. His mother and yours exchanged words at the last thing. You are not asked if you like him. You are not asked at all, but you do not resist. You have been raised to expect this moment. To keep your voice soft, your eyes lowered, your movements careful. You are not weak, but you are trained. Your worth, you've been told, lies in what you bring to your new household, skills children honor. The morning of your wedding is quiet. The weather is cold. You rise before the sun and eat a piece of dried fish and hard bread. Your sister braids your hair. Your mother kisses your forehead. There are no bright flowers, no songs, no nervous laughter, just the rhythm of what must be done. The ceremony is simple. The two families gather in a clearing or near a hearth. Witnesses are present. You exchange tokens, maybe a knife, a ring, or a bundle of keys. The man gives you a sword from his ancestors. You give him a dowry, cloth, livestock, tools. There is no priest, no chapel, but there are sacred customs. You are led to a bed covered in sheepskins. Your shoes are taken off. Bread is broken and shared. Later, the marriage is sealed, not in public, but in private. The details are not spoken aloud, only whispered among women the next day. And then you live. You run a household. You cook. You weave. You raise animals. You carry water. You bear children, often many, though not all survive. You tend to sickness, birth, death. If your husband goes raiding, you take his place at the farm. If he dies, you might remarry. Or not. And in time you grow old. But tonight you are still 12. The fire flickers. You sit in a corner of the longhouse, your wedding cloak pulled tight around your shoulders. Your hands are folded in your lap. Your new husband speaks with the others, laughing, drinking. No one is unkind, but no one looks too closely. You are a Viking bride, and in this world, that means stepping into the life that has been laid out for you. Quietly, carefully, with your eyes open, and your heart steady. Outside, the wind presses against the wooden walls. The sea is never far, and neither is tomorrow. Let us now leave the quiet hearth and step into the open air, into a crowd, into tension, into tradition. You are standing in a wide field. There are hundreds of people here, all gathered for a single reason. The thing. No, not a monster, not a creature, though in its own way it could become one. The thing was the Viking version of a court, a council, a parliament, and a festival, all rolled into one. Every free person had the right to attend, to listen, and sometimes even to speak. But it was not peaceful. It was not polite. It was loud, rough, full of arguing voices and sharpened stares. You stand with your neighbors, wrapped in your best wool cloak. The sun is out, but the wind cuts through like a blade. Smoke from campfires hangs in the air. Traders have set up stalls along the edge, selling furs, knives, honey, and amber beads. Children chase each other between wagons. Dogs bark, but your eyes are on the raised wooden platform ahead. There stand the law speaker and the gwa, the local chieftains or priests, depending on the region. The law speaker's job is ancient. He does not read from scrolls, there are none. He recites the law, from memory, slowly, carefully, repeating each rule, each verdict, each fine. It takes hours, days even, because in Viking law, every offense has a price. Steal a goat? Pay 3 silver coins. Injure a neighbor's son? Pay in sheep or service. Kill a man? You must pay his wergild, his man price, or risk a blood feud that could last generations. And that's why you're here. There's been a murder. 2 families are locked in bitter conflict. The killer claims it was an accident. The victim's brother demands justice. Both are shouting. Both are armed. The crowd leans in, but no one moves to stop them yet. At the Thing, this is how justice works. Arguments are allowed to rise. Witnesses are heard. Oaths are sworn. Sometimes voices shake with rage. Other times the words are calm, rehearsed cold. There are no jails in this world. No police. Only fines, exile, or revenge. The law speaker's voice rises. He names the fine, 30 ounces of silver. A steep price. The killer nods once. The victim's brother spits in the grass, but accepts. For now. Later, under the cover of night, this truce might fall apart. Knives might be drawn. Feuds are not easily ended in Viking lands. Memory is long. Pride is sharp. And still, the Thing continues. Elsewhere in the gathering, someone is negotiating a marriage contract. Another man petitions for help repairing a bridge. A young woman asks to reclaim her father's land after her brother's death. This is not just a court, it is a community. Laws are not just punishments. They are agreements, traditions, ways to keep people from tearing each other apart when the world is already hard enough. But it doesn't always work. Sometimes the Thing ends with peace, sometimes with blood, and sometimes it simply ends with silence as the crowd slowly scatters, the arguments unfinished, the questions lingering in the cool evening air. You walk home, boots heavy with mud. You didn't speak today. You didn't need to. But you watched. And you listened. And you remembered who said what and who stood where and who didn't bow. Because next time, it might be your turn. The Thing was not just a court. It was a mirror of Viking life. Loud, lawful, and dangerously human. Now step away from the crowds. Follow the scent of pine and the sharp tang of sap. Listen. There, beyond the trees, you hear it? The steady thok-thok-thok of axes striking wood. You are in a Viking shipyard. Not the kind with metal cranes or engines. This one is simple, just logs, tools, sawdust, and sweat. It lies near a fjord, where the water meets the land like a smooth gray mirror. And here, under an open sky, a longship is being born. But what makes a longship a longship? You probably imagine something fierce, sleek, fast, carved with dragon heads and shields lining the rails. That's partly true. But what you might not know is that Vikings built these ships without iron nails. Not because they didn't know how, but because they had something better. They used clinker construction. That means the planks of the ship overlapped each other, like fish scales. These planks, usually oak, were shaped by hand, then fastened using wooden pegs and iron rivets, yes, but far fewer than you'd expect. Instead, they tied the entire hull together with animal hair rope, soaked and swollen to keep it tight. This made the ship flexible. It could twist and bend with the waves, not break. It was light enough to carry across land, yet strong enough to cross the open sea. The work began with a single keel, the backbone of the ship. Long, straight, carefully chosen from the forest. From there, the builders added ribs, then planks, then the mast and her holes. Every part was measured by eye. No blueprints. No sketches. Just memory. Experience. Craft passed down through generations. Imagine your hands holding a tool called a broad axe. Heavy, sharp, used to shave curves into green oak. You work beside your father and grandfather. The chips of wood fly like snowflakes. The smell of sap clings to your clothes. Nearby, a pile of horsehair is drying in the sun, soon to be mixed with pine tar and used to seal the seams. Someone stirs a pot of boiling pitch, thick and black, ready to coat the hull. The sails? Woven from wool, soaked in grease to catch the wind. Each one takes months to make. Women spin, dye, and stitch. It's as much their ship as it is yours. The finished longship will be narrow and long, with a shallow bottom, perfect for gliding up rivers and across oceans. It won't hold much cargo, just warriors, shields, axes, maybe treasure on the way back. But it's not just for war. Vikings used longships to explore, to settle, to trade. They crossed to the British Isles, to France, even to Iceland and Greenland. Some say they reached North America, hundreds of years before Columbus. And it all began in places like this, with quiet woods, with sharp tools, with tired hands. Building a longship wasn't fast. It could take months, even a year, depending on the size and weather. But when it was done, it was more than a boat. It was a symbol of strength, of freedom, of movement. To own a ship meant power. To build one meant skill. And to ride one across the sea meant you were ready to leave the familiar behind. But for now, the ship is still here. Still unfinished. Still resting on logs, waiting for the pitch to dry, the sail to be hoisted, the oars to be carved. You place a hand on the smooth hull. You feel the grain of the wood, the silent promise it holds. One day soon, this longship will slip into the water like a shadow, and then it will carry history on its back. Let your mind drift now from the hammering of axes and the scent of pine to something quieter, smaller, etched into stone, or carved into wood, or scratched into a piece of bone, no larger than your hand. You're looking at a rune. To most people, it's just a strange symbol, sharp lines, no curves, no familiar letters. But to you, to a Viking in the 9th or 10th century, it's something much more. It's a word, a prayer, a message, or a warning. The runes are the letters of the Futhark, the Viking alphabet, named after its first 6 letters, Fu, called Thursday, A, R, and K. Unlike the Latin alphabet we use today, the runes weren't meant for speed or long stories. They were used sparingly, carefully, because each rune carried not just sound, but meaning. For example, the rune, Fehu, meant both the letter F and the idea of cattle or wealth. Uras stood for the letter U, and also for strength like a wild ox. Every symbol came from nature, from daily life, from myth. They weren't just written. They were invoked. Vikings didn't write in books. Most couldn't read or write at all. But those who did, often poets, priests, or wise men, used runes with care. You'd find them carved on gravestones, weapons, amulets, and the occasional ship's keel. And sometimes they were hidden. Some runestones contain puzzles. Others are filled with curses. One famous rune stick from Bergen reads like a secret note. "Kiss me, I'm lonely." Another simply says, "I carved this late at night." Even in the Viking Age, people wrote things they didn't want others to hear. Imagine carving runes into a smooth stick of birch. Each stroke must be straight, precise. You cannot erase. You hold the blade carefully. Each cut is small, but together, they form a message only someone trained in runes can read. Some believed runes held magic. In the sagas, heroes write runes to heal wounds, protect ships, or curse their enemies. The god Odin, it was said, hung himself from the great world tree, Yggdrasil, pierced by a spear for 9 long nights, just to gain the secret of the runes. They were not just letters. They were power. But not all uses were so grand. Many runes simply said things like Thor carved this stone, or Rafn was here. Just names, dates, marks of presence. Like a Viking version of graffiti. Archaeologists have found over 6,000 rune carvings in Scandinavia. Some on towering stones. Others on wooden scraps buried deep beneath old cities. Some are prayers. Some are jokes. Some are complete mysteries, still untranslated to this day. And so the runes speak, even now. They whisper across time. Their sharp angles cut through centuries. A language without curves. A language of ice and stone and memory. So if you ever find yourself walking through the cold mist of a Viking graveyard, and you see a tall stone covered in strange, straight lines, pause. Look closely. You are not just reading a name. You are hearing a voice. A quiet one. From a world that is gone, but not silent. Step now out of the open air and into something darker. Smaller. The kind of place where your eyes never quite adjust, and where the walls themselves feel close, alive, even with damp breath and the slow creak of wood. You are in a turf house. This is your home. Not a cozy cottage. Not a fine hall. Just a long, low shelter. Half buried in the earth, covered in layers of sod, with a thatched or wooden roof held down by stones. It's built not for beauty, but for survival. Outside, the wind howls almost constantly. Snow falls sideways. The sky turns gray by afternoon and doesn't lighten until mid-morning. You might be in Iceland or the Faroes or somewhere along Norway's jagged coast. And this turf house? It's your only defense. It holds the heat, barely. You duck your head to step inside. The doorway is small, low to keep out drafts. Immediately, the air changes. It's warm, yes, but heavy. Thick with the scent of smoke, wool, sour milk, damp clothes, old fish, and unwashed skin. There are no windows. Just tiny slits, if any at all. Most of the light comes from a single hearth in the center. Smoke curls slowly upward, escaping through a hole in the ceiling. Some days it escapes. Other days it lingers, stinging your eyes. Inside, everything is soft-edged and shadowed. Your family shares this space, 6, maybe 7 of you. The animals sometimes 2 in the coldest months. A lamb. A goat. Maybe the cow if she hasn't died yet. The walls are made of peat and stone, stacked in layers like a thick sandwich of grass and dirt. You don't lean on them, they're often wet. The floor is stamped earth, covered in straw. Your bed is a pile of furs on a wooden frame, or more often, just a raised platform. And always there is darkness. Even in daytime, the light never fills the corners. You move slowly by memory. The fire is rarely strong enough to brighten the whole room, just the few feet around it. Shadows crawl up the walls. You squint to see the thread in your hand as you sew. You hold a candle when you must, tallow, smoky, short-lived. The rhythm of life inside this house is slow, repetitive, not out of peace, but necessity. You wake. You feed the fire. You turn the cheese. You grind the grain. You twist the wool. You wait for water to boil. You patch a hole in your cloak. You stir the sour porridge. There is little talking. Voices echo strangely off turf walls. And words, in the dark, sometimes feel heavier than they should. In winter, weeks pass without stepping outside. You listen to the weather through the roof. You listen to your neighbors through the walls. You listen to your own thoughts more than you'd like. But this house keeps you alive. Turf is good insulation. The ground stores heat. The roof doesn't blow off in storms. You may cough from the smoke, trip in the shadows, and shiver under thin blankets, but you live. And that, in the Viking world, is a victory in itself. Some families carve patterns into the beams. Others hang charms from the rafters, bones, bits of iron, or small wooden runes. Protection. Hope. Something to hold on to in the quiet. Because the quiet gets deep here. So deep you forget what day it is. So deep you forget the color of the sky. And when night falls, though it never quite felt like day, you pull your cloak tighter. You roll toward the fire. You listen to someone breathing across the room. You hear the turf roof creak as it settles. And you wait for morning. Now open your eyes again, not to the quiet dark of the turf house, but to the sharp sting of salt air. You are no longer at home. You are at sea. And you are tired. Bone-deep tired. You are a Viking raider. Not the kind from stories, the ones with horned helmets, which, as you now know, were never real, riding into battle with shining swords. No, you are the real kind. The kind who hasn't slept properly in 5 days. The kind who smells like dried fish, wet wool, and blood that isn't all yours. The longship rocks beneath you, low in the water, crowded with 20 or 30 others. You sit hunched, one hand still on your oar, your eyes flickering open and shut. The wind bites. Your fingers are cracked. Your lips are swollen from salt. Why did you come? Well, maybe you had no choice. Maybe the Jarl demanded it. Maybe your harvest failed, and there was no food. Maybe you were promised treasure or land, or just a chance to get away. So you boarded the ship. And you rowed. For hours. Then days. Sometimes the sail helps. Sometimes it doesn't. The wind can vanish just when you need it most, or blow you off course into strange waters. You sleep in shifts, curled at the bottom of the boat, using a sack of ropes as a pillow. When you land, you raid. You do it quickly. You and the others run up the beach, weapons drawn. You don't know if the people ahead will fight or flee. Sometimes they cry. Sometimes they try to buy you off. Sometimes they fight harder than expected. You never know. You take what you can. Silver, mostly. Food. Livestock. Sometimes people. Then you go before soldiers arrive. And then you row again. Over and over. The raids are not always glorious. Sometimes there is nothing to steal. Sometimes the monks have already hidden the church treasure. Sometimes the villages are so poor, they cry from hunger too. And still you raid. Because back home, your Jarl expects a share. Because you've risked your life. Because you're already here. The smell of blood lingers in your nose. Not just others, your own too. You scraped your hand climbing a stone wall. You cracked a rib falling in armor too heavy. You haven't bathed. You haven't eaten anything warm since leaving. Your eyes sting from smoke and salt. You think of your turf house. Of the fire. Of the goat you left behind. Of your child who might be walking now. But you're still at sea. And it's not over. The others sing quietly as they row. A chant to keep rhythm. A song older than you are, passed down from men who sailed before. You join in barely. Your voice cracks. No one notices. Even the sky feels tired. Some of your shipmates dream of what they'll do with their silver, if they make it home. New boots. A better roof. A necklace for their wife. Others just want to sleep. But for now, you keep rowing. The next coast is still ahead. The next raid. The next night on the cold ground. And you, aching, exhausted, hungry, row on. Because this is what Viking raiding really was. Not a storm of glory, but a slow, grinding test of endurance. Let's return from the sea, but only just. The ship is tied to a wooden post, swaying gently in the tide. The sun is low, glinting off the water. And your hands? They are covered in fish scales. Again, you are not a warrior today. You are a fisherman. Or perhaps a fishwife. A fish dryer. A fish smoker. A fish hauler. Whatever the title, the result is the same. You smell like fish. Always. And in Viking society, that meant nearly every day of your life. Fish was the lifeblood of the Norse coastal diet. Especially in the far north, where crops were unreliable, meat was scarce, and winters were long. Herring. Cod. Eel. Trout. Even dried shark if you lived in Iceland and had the stomach for it. But fishing wasn't just a quiet pastime, it was a full-time job. A hard one. Imagine it. You row out before dawn when the water is still black. The air stings your cheeks. You cast your net, woven by hand, and wait. Hours pass. Your feet are wet. Your cloak is damp. Your nose runs. You don't dare fall asleep. When the net is pulled in, it's heavy with movement. Fish slapping and twisting, silver bodies flashing in the light. You dump them into the boat. Your arms ache. The bottom of the boat is slick. And the smell is permanent. Back on shore, the real work begins. The fish must be gutted, cleaned, split open, salted, and laid on wooden racks to dry, or packed into barrels for salting. You do this for hours, days, weeks. In summer, the flies swarm. In winter, your fingers go numb. You carry the smell home with you. It seeps into your clothes, your hair, your bed. There is no soap, no showers, just cold water and strong wind. If you are lucky enough to live near a trade port, like Hedeby or Kopang, you might sell your dried fish to merchants heading south. In exchange, you might get wool, tools, beads, or more salt. Because salt in the Viking Age was more valuable than silver in some places. Without it, fish would spoil. With it, your village could survive the winter. But salt was rare and expensive. You might boil it from seawater in great iron pots, or trade for it from Saxon merchants. Either way, it was a precious, gritty gold. And so fish ruled everything. It filled bellies. It paid debts. It built friendships between coastal settlements. And it built a certain aroma into the very fabric of Norse life. There were jokes even then. People teased each other with names like fishcarl or codbreath. But no one laughed too hard, because everyone knew the same life. The same stink. Some archaeologists, digging near Viking harbors, have found layers of fish bones several feet thick. 1,000 years later, they still carry the smell. Imagine that. The scent of a people's survival, preserved in the soil. You turn in for the night, sir, from lifting barrels. Your bed is straw. Your hands are still greasy. You scratch your nose and pause. Yes, still smells like fish. It always will. Now close your eyes and drift, away from the fish-slick shorelines, away from the turf house shadows, away from cracked hands and salted nets. Drift into something older, stranger, deeper. You are listening to a story. The fire is low. The longhouse is warm. Outside, the wind howls over the hills. But inside, someone is speaking. An elder. A skald. A wandering poet. Their voice is calm, unhurried, almost like a chant. And the story they tell is strange. Because Norse mythology, the belief system that shaped the Viking world, wasn't neat or polite or simple. It was raw, mysterious, often very, very weird. It begins not with light, but with ice. At the beginning of everything, there was a void. Ginnungagap. One side frozen, one side burning. And from their meeting came Ymir, the first giant, born from melting frost. Ymir sweated other giants from under his arms. His legs had children together. Then came Odin, who, along with his brothers, killed Ymir and made the world from his body. The sky from his skull. The oceans from his blood. The mountains from his bones. And the clouds? From his brain. Not exactly bedtime reading. But this was how the Norse explained the world. Everything had a spirit. The trees, the rivers, the wind, the thunder. There were gods for all of it, gods who were flawed, violent, and deeply human. Take Odin, for example. He was the All-Father, yes, but also a wanderer, a shapeshifter. He gave up an eye for wisdom and hung himself on the world tree for 9 days to learn the runes. He was wise, but not kind. And Thor, you know him from movies, perhaps. But the real Thor was rougher. A red-bearded god with iron gloves and a hammer called Mjolnir, used not just for battle, but for blessings, on homes, on babies, on marriages. He once dressed as a bride to get his stolen hammer back. Yes, Thor in a wedding dress. That was part of the story. And no one thought it was strange. Then there's Loki, the trickster. Not quite a god, not quite a friend. He helped the gods sometimes, and ruined everything at other times. He changed shape. He gave birth to a horse. He fathered a wolf, a world serpent, and a half-dead queen. His children would one day end the world. And speaking of endings, the Norse believed in ragnarok, a coming apocalypse. Not a maybe, but a certainty. The gods would fight the giants. The sky would burn. The sea would rise. Thor would die. Odin would die. The world would sink beneath the waves. But after, it would rise again, green and new. A quiet hope beneath the chaos. These myths weren't just entertainment. They were explanations. For lightning. For war. For why bad things happen to good people. They were whispered over sick beds. Painted on shields. Carved into stones. Not everyone believed the same details. Belief was flexible. Local. You might hear a different version of a myth in Iceland than in Sweden. Some believed the gods walked among them in disguise. Others left offerings, ale, bones, bread, buried in the earth or cast into water. And some just told stories. Around fires like this. Strange stories. Of goats whose udders gave endless mead. Of a squirrel that ran up and down the world tree, insulting everyone. Of a ship made from the fingernails of the dead. Weird, yes, but to the Vikings it was the truth. Or at least the part of the truth they could understand. So tonight, as the fire flickers low, and your head nods gently forward, you hear the storyteller's voice still weaving its spell. You smile at the absurdity, at the mystery, at the beauty of a world where gods cross-dress, wolves swallow the sun, and brains become clouds. Because Norse mythology was pretty weird. And that's exactly what made it memorable. Let's take a moment to pause, and picture something you've probably seen many times. A Viking, bearded, wild-eyed, shouting as he charges from a longship, swinging an axe, and wearing a helmet with 2 great curved horns. Except that part never happened. Viking helmets didn't have horns. Not in battle. Not on raids. Not ever. So where did this image come from? And why has it stuck so firmly in our minds? Let's begin with what Vikings actually wore on their heads. Very few Viking helmets have survived. In fact, only one nearly complete Viking-age helmet has ever been found, unearthed in Norway in the 1940s, from a burial site in Germunbu. It's round iron with a simple nose guard. No horns, just sturdy and practical. Most Vikings didn't even wear metal helmets at all. Iron was expensive. The average warrior might have only a leather cap, if anything. Some may have gone into battle bareheaded, especially poor farmers fighting to defend their homes. Horned helmets would have been a disaster. Imagine running into battle, swinging a weapon, while wearing 2 large, curved horns on your head. They'd catch on branches, get grabbed by enemies, throw off your balance, and they'd take far too long to make. In real combat, you want to be protected, not theatrical. So why do we picture them this way? The answer lies not in the Viking Age, but in the 1800s. During that time, Norse mythology became wildly popular across Europe. Artists, writers, and composers began to reimagine the ancient stories, and they took some liberties. One of the most famous examples was Richard Wagner's opera cycle Der Ring de Nibelungen, a sweeping retelling of Norse and Germanic myths. When it premiered, the costume designer gave his Viking characters horned helmets. Not for historical accuracy, but for drama. They looked impressive on stage. They helped the audience tell heroes from villains. And they matched a growing romantic idea of ancient warriors, fierce, wild, and barbaric. From there, the image spread. Painters picked it up. Postcards printed it. Cartoons used it. By the 20th century, horned Viking helmets were everywhere, from cereal boxes to football mascots to Halloween costumes. And the real Vikings? They'd never seen one. In fact, horned helmets did exist in Europe, but from much earlier periods, long before the Viking Age. Some Bronze Age cultures used horned helmets in ritual ceremonies. These weren't for fighting. They were symbols of gods, of status, of mystery. By the Viking Age, those helmets were long gone. So next time you see a Viking in a horned helmet, you'll know. That's not history. That's opera. That's costume. That's fantasy. The real Vikings wore simple gear. They fought hard. They sailed far. But they did it all without horns. Now let the myths fade. Let the songs grow quiet. And let time move forward, through the years of sailing, farming, and fighting, until one day you wake, and your knees creak. Your hands tremble. Your teeth ache, or are gone altogether. You are no longer young. You are an old Viking. And it sucks, because in the Viking world, old age wasn't honored the way you might think. There were no comfortable retirements. No warm blankets and rocking chairs. No quiet porches and storytelling. There was just work. And when your body couldn't do it anymore, things got hard. You were expected to contribute for as long as you could. That might mean tending the fire, sharpening tools, watching the animals, or teaching younger ones to mend nets or carve runes. But if your hands failed, or your eyesight blurred too much to help, your value in the household faded. Especially if you were poor. There were no pensions. No savings. If your family still needed you, they might keep you warm and fed. If not, they might not. In fact, some old Vikings chose to die rather than be a burden. There's an old Icelandic story of a man who, upon realizing he was too old to be useful, walked up a mountain to throw himself off. His sons followed him and stopped him. But the story stuck, for centuries, as a dark kind of wisdom. And that says a lot about the Viking view of old age. To grow old meant to slow down, and slowing down meant losing your place in the group. You couldn't farm as hard. You couldn't row a longship. You couldn't fight. And that last one mattered, because Viking culture was built around the idea of a glorious death, dying in battle, weapon in hand, eyes fixed on Valhalla. But if you died in bed, in the cold, forgotten, that meant hell. Not the fiery hell of modern stories, but a cold, gray, shadowy place beneath the earth. A place for those who died soft deaths. Imagine that. You survive all the raids, all the winters, all the sickness. And your reward? Isolation, weakness, uncertainty. Your body aches. Your teeth are gone. Your breath smells of old milk and damp straw. You sit by the hearth and watch others live the life you once had. And it's lonely. Even storytelling, once a respected role for elders, began to lose its power when your mind went foggy. If your memory slipped, if your words tangled, people stopped listening. So you sit, and think, and wonder. Maybe someone brings you a crust of bread. Maybe they don't. Maybe someone asks you for advice. But usually they just pass you by, rushing off to the next task, the next raid, the next season. You try to stay warm. You wrap your blanket tighter. You stare into the fire. And you remember when your hands were strong, when your voice carried, when the world felt full of motion. Now it doesn't. And so, in the Viking world, to grow old was not always a blessing. It was sometimes a burden, sometimes a quiet waiting, and always a return to the dark. Let's turn now from old age to something just as uncertain in the Viking world, getting sick. Because if you were injured or ill, if your bones ached or your gut burned or your child ran hot with fever, you were mostly on your own. There were no hospitals, no antibiotics, no real understanding of how the body worked. Just mead, plants, prayers, and a fair bit of mistrust. Viking medicine was a mix of observation, trial and error, superstition. And surprisingly, some deep herbal knowledge passed from generation to generation. Healers, sometimes women, sometimes old men, might be called to your home with a satchel of dried roots, moss, and tools. They might chant. They might bleed you. They might give you a poultice made from tree bark and spit. And sometimes it worked. But just as often it didn't. Let's say you have a deep cut from splitting wood. First, the healer might clean it with water, if water was nearby. Then, she might pack the wound with moss, which, as modern scientists discovered centuries later, actually contains natural antiseptics. Smart, right? But she might also blow runes over the wound, whispering spells, and offer you a horn of mead, not because it would heal you, but because it dulled the pain. For stomach aches, dried herbs like angelica, thyme, or juniper berries might be steeped in hot water. For fever, you'd be wrapped in furs and made to sweat. For broken bones, there wasn't much they could do. Maybe splint it, maybe bind it with tree resin. Surgery? Rare, dangerous, and often deadly. There were no clean tools, no understanding of germs. Any operation could turn fatal just from infection. So most injuries were treated by doing as little as possible. Rest, liquids, hope. And if you got worse, well, maybe someone angered the gods. Or maybe you had a spirit trapped inside you. Yes, many Vikings believed that illness could be caused by invisible forces. Evil thoughts, bad dreams, curses. Sometimes a healer would call in a Volva, a seeress, to diagnose what the eyes could not see. She might burn herbs. She might call out names to test which spirit was responsible. She might ask questions no one wanted to answer. And this led to mistrust. Because if your neighbor recovered quickly, people wondered, what charm had they used? What spirit had they bargained with? If a child died, and the healer failed, suspicion followed. You couldn't blame germs. You couldn't blame weather. So sometimes people were blamed instead. But there were bright spots. Archaeologists have found Viking-age combs, tweezers, and even toothpicks, suggesting a real care for personal hygiene. Skeletons show some signs of healed injuries, even amputations that survived. People tried. They learned. They shared what worked. And through this blurry mix of tradition and chance, Viking medicine kept people going. Barely. Today, it's easy to think of them as tough and strong, and they were. But they had no help beyond the natural world. No clear answers. Only firelight, a few herbs, a carved rune, and a quiet hope that this time, the sickness would pass. Now let's sail far, farther than Viking ships were ever really meant to go. Across the sea, past Iceland, past Greenland, all the way to a misty, tree-covered shore, in a place we now call North America. You are with Leif Erikson, the so-called discoverer of Vinland. The first European, long before Columbus, to set foot in the New World. But despite the myth, the saga, and the statue you might find in modern cities, the real story? Well, it wasn't that great. Let's start with Leif himself. He was born around the year 970 CE, the son of Eric the Red, a fiery, exiled man who'd founded the first Norse settlements in Greenland. Eric had been kicked out of Norway for murder, then kicked out of Iceland for the same thing. Leif inherited his father's boldness, and probably his temper. But Leif wasn't just a fighter, he was curious. A sailor. And when he heard stories from a trader named Bjarni Herjolfsson about land spotted west of Greenland, he decided to find it. Around the year 1000 CE, Leif Erikson and his crew set sail. What they found was not a land of gold or cities. It was a stretch of coastline. Forests, rivers. Grapes, maybe. Flat rocks. Mild weather compared to Greenland. They called it Vinland, and they built a small settlement. But things quickly went wrong. The sagas tell us the Norse clashed with the local people, called the Skrælings in Viking stories. We don't know exactly who these people were, possibly ancestors of the Beothuk or other indigenous North American groups. At first, there may have been trade. Then came tension. Then came violence. The sagas are vague. The facts blur with myth. But one thing is clear, the Norse didn't stay. Leif's colony lasted maybe a few years. Not decades. Not generations. Just a brief attempt. Far from home, thinly supplied, and surrounded by people who didn't ask for their arrival. Eventually, they packed up and sailed back to Greenland. There was no treasure. No maps. No kingdoms founded. Just some timber. Maybe a few tales. And a quiet note in the sagas that they'd been somewhere strange. Leif Erikson did what few others dared. But when he returned to Greenland, he didn't become rich. Or powerful. He inherited his father's farm. Settled down. Raised sheep. Tried to keep things going. And that was the end of it. For hundreds of years, the story was forgotten. Until the late 1800s, when Norse pride was rising again in Scandinavia and among Scandinavian immigrants in America. People wanted a hero. A discoverer. Someone to put on a pedestal. So Leif Erikson was remembered. Statues were built. Schools were named. A U.S. president even declared October 9th as Leif Erikson Day. But if Leif were alive to see it, he might be confused. Because his voyage didn't change the world. It didn't lead to new colonies. Or trade. Or maps. It was just a short trip. A dangerous experiment. A story whispered in firelight. Still it mattered. Not because it was glorious, but because it shows us what real exploration is. Uncomfortable. Uncertain. Full of hope and risk and silence. Leif didn't find treasure, but he did find something rare. A glimpse, however brief, of a world beyond all maps. And maybe that was enough. Now return with me, not across oceans, but home. Home to a Viking settlement. To a place where the sky turns gray for weeks at a time, and the sun barely rises in winter. Where the wind moves sideways and the snow piles higher than your knees. Where life doesn't stop, but it certainly slows. And now imagine this winter, without firewood. The nights come early. The days are short. You wake in cold darkness, and you go to bed in even colder darkness. The fire in the hearth has burned low again. Not because someone forgot to feed it, but because there's nothing left to burn. You used the last of your stacked birch logs 2 days ago. The twigs are gone. The peat bricks are gone. You burned old furniture. You even burned that broken or from last summer. Now the hearth glows with only a whisper of ember. And the cold creeps in. You wrap yourself in your cloak, but it's not enough. The turf walls hold some warmth, but not much. The roof drips a little when the snow above begins to melt from your body heat. Your breath hangs in the air, visible like a ghost. The inside of your nose stings. Your fingers are stiff. The water barrel is frozen over, so you chip at it with the back of a knife. You warm your hands by the tiny red coals, and they don't really warm. You try not to move much. Every motion feels like work. The children whimper, even in sleep. You pull furs over them. The baby's nose is pink. Your own toes ache, then go numb, then ache again. There is no wood outside. Not unless you walk deep into the hills, where the wind screams, and the snow might bury your footprints before you return. And even then, any tree that's still standing is wet with ice. Green, hard to chop, heavy to carry. And the axe? Its head is dull. Its handle is cracked. You think of spring. But spring is months away. You think of neighbors. But they're cold too. Sometimes when things get truly desperate, people burn dung, dried animal droppings collected from the cowshed. It smells awful, but it gives off a little heat. A little light. You already used what you had. Now you burn hope. You ration the fire like food. 1 stick now, maybe 1 more tonight. You light a candle if you must, but mostly you sit in shadow, wrapped tight, waiting. The stew doesn't boil anymore. It just warms. Slowly. You hold your bowl with both hands to feel the heat. It's watery. Turnips, maybe, and a shred of dried fish. Not enough. Nothing is enough. This is not the part of Viking life in the sagas. No one sings songs about running out of firewood. But it happened. Often. Wood was scarce in places like Iceland and Greenland, where trees were few and winds were cruel. Entire families huddled together in the dark, surviving not through strength, but through stillness. Because when there is no fire, your only heat is each other. You sleep side by side. You speak only when needed. You breathe slow. And you wait. For sun. For warmth. For the thaw that will let you gather driftwood again. Until then, the cold is your companion. It doesn't shout. It whispers. And you learn slowly, painfully, to live with it. Now let's move away from the cold silence of a fireless winter, and into a truth that is colder still. A truth that doesn't appear in most Viking legends. A truth that many would rather forget. The Vikings traded slaves. Often. Routinely. Brutally. They called them thralls. And in many Viking communities, you might have been one of them. Imagine waking to the sound of waves. Not in your home, but on a boat. A longship. Your wrists are bound. Your eyes are swollen from crying. You don't understand the language. You've been taken from a village along the Irish coast. Or maybe the English. Or the Baltic. You are not a prisoner of war. You are property now. Vikings raided across Europe, but they didn't just take gold or livestock, they took people. Slavery was a major part of the Norse economy, and captives were incredibly valuable. Strong backs for farm work. Skilled hands for weaving. Pretty faces for sale. Some were taken during raids. Others were born into slavery, children of thralls, owned from the moment they drew breath. And what was life like? Long, hard. Controlled. You slept on straw if you were lucky. Ate after your master, if anything was left. Worked from sunrise to dark. Hauling, grinding, cleaning, herding. You had no rights. No protections. You could be sold. Given away. Beaten. You might be branded. Or collared. If you tried to escape, and were caught, your punishment was severe. Sometimes final. But not all thralls were mistreated. Some were kept for years, even decades. Some worked their way to a better place in the household. A few were freed. In fact, freedom was possible. A master could declare a slave free. and some did. These freedmen, called leysingi, could marry, own property, even earn wealth. But they were always marked by their past, always reminded, always lesser in the eyes of society. And for every one who was freed, many more never were. In the big Viking trade towns, like Hedeby or Birka, slaves were bought and sold like cattle. Traders came from far and wide. Arabs, Byzantines, even fellow Scandinavians. A strong young woman might fetch a high price. A skilled craftsman even higher. It was business. It was normal. It was everywhere. And today, when we think of Viking ships, we often imagine warriors. But just as often, those ships carried chains. Fear. Grief. Historians believe that tens of thousands of people were enslaved by the Vikings over the centuries. Some lived and died unnamed. Some built the very settlements we now dig up in modern times. And when we find their bones, they tell quiet stories. Of worn-down teeth from grinding grain. Of healed fractures and unhealed ones. Of burial without grave goods, because they had nothing to be buried with. So tonight, remember this. Viking life was not just axes and mead halls. It was also ownership. Of other people. And for every jarl who dined in a carved hall, someone else gathered the firewood, carried the water, cooked the stew, and waited for morning with no name of their own. Now let us move slowly and gently from life to death. The cold has taken you, or maybe it was sickness, or age, or battle. Whatever the cause, your eyes have closed for the final time. You will not wake again, but your journey is far from over, because in the Viking world, death was a passage, and the way your body was treated after it ended told a story about your life, your status, and where people believed your spirit might go. You are about to be buried, but not in a church, not in a coffin. You are being placed in a boat. Yes, a real boat, pulled onto land, or built into the earth. Your final resting place. Not because you are a sailor, though you might have been, but because in Viking belief, boats were sacred vessels of the soul. They carried the living across water, and they carried the dead into the unknown. Sometimes, the boat was small, little more than a symbolic vessel laid beneath stones. Other times, for chieftains or nobles, it was a full-sized longship, carefully prepared. The Oseberg ship in Norway, for example, was over 70 feet long, and became a tomb for 2 high-ranking women. Let's imagine your burial. Your body is wrapped in cloth. You are placed in the boat, surrounded by goods. Your sword or your spindle, a drinking horn, some tools, a comb, maybe even a favorite pet. These aren't luxuries. They are necessities for the journey ahead. Because in Norse belief, the afterlife wasn't a single place. It depended on who you were and how you died. If you fell in battle, weapon in hand, the Valkyries might carry your soul to Valhalla, the Hall of the Slain, where Odin himself waited. There, you would feast and feast again, preparing for ragnarok. But if you died in sickness, in sleep, you might go to hell, ruled by a half-dead goddess of the same name. It wasn't a place of punishment, but it wasn't cheerful either. It was gray, cold, still. Some believed in other realms, Folkvanger, ruled by Freya, or even sailing eternally on the sea. And so, to prepare for the journey, your people placed you in the boat. Sometimes, the ship was set aflame, pushed out into the water as fire consumed the body and lifted the smoke skyward. Other times, the ship was buried, carefully placed in a trench, then covered with stones or turf to form a mound. Archaeologists have found these ships, some preserved in mud, others flattened by time. Inside, they found iron nails, bones, weapons, the ashes of the dead, sometimes animals, sometimes human sacrifices, though those were rare and surrounded by mystery. These burial boats weren't common for everyone. Only the powerful, the rich, the respected. Most people, farmers, thralls, were buried simply, in pits, with little ceremony. But the boat burial captured the imagination. It was symbolic, powerful, poetic. Even today, we speak of someone crossing over, or being sent off. These ideas are ancient, and the Vikings held them tightly. Death was not the end. It was a voyage, one you could not make empty-handed. So as your people pile stones over your ship, sealing you in darkness, they whisper your name. They raise horns of mead. They tell stories. And they hope that somewhere, across a cold and unseen sea, you are still sailing. Now imagine yourself in a small Viking village. The night is quiet, and the stars scatter across a wide, endless sky. Fires have been put out. The cows have been penned in. Children sleep under wool blankets. But no one sleeps easily. A child is sick. The weather has turned strange. A neighbor saw something unusual in the sky, and so they send for her. The Volva. She arrives walking slowly, leaning on a carved staff. Her clothes are different, layered in colors trimmed with beads, brooches, bone. Around her waist hang pouches of herbs, feathers, bones, stones. Her eyes are calm, but far away. She is not like other women. She is a seeress, a walker between worlds. She does not farm. She does not marry. She belongs to no one. But everyone fears her and needs her, because the Volva speaks to things that others cannot see. She does not call herself a witch, but she fits many of the signs. She chants spells. She performs seer, a kind of Norse magic involving trance, song, and vision. She may call on Odin or Freya, or the spirits of land and ancestors. She may sit in silence, eyes shut, breathing slowly. And then she begins to speak. Sometimes it's a warning. The storm will flood the fields. A journey should be delayed. An enemy is coming. Other times it's a blessing. A child will live. A crop will thrive. A dream has meaning. You listen, unsure if it's real. But you don't question her, because the Volva is respected and feared. She is not part of the usual Viking world of raiding, trading, farming. She stands outside it. Yet every village has one or knows one. And when things go wrong, it is the Volva who is called. She knows the old ways, the words passed down through whispers, the songs that make animals sleep or send sickness away. And she is paid well, not with coins, but with food, blankets, honor. Sometimes land, sometimes a place to live. She is not always old. Some Volvas are young, but age gives power because knowledge grows over time. And those who have seen many winters are thought to be closer to the veil between worlds. But it's not an easy life. Many feared the Volva's power. In Christian times, they were driven away, or worse. The old songs were silenced. The staffs were burned. Their names forgotten. Yet archaeologists still find their graves. One famous Volva burial in Osberg, Norway, held not just a body, but a wagon, animals, ceremonial tools. The woman inside was powerful, honored. She had not just predicted the future. She shaped it. So tonight, as the wind shifts and the moon rises high, imagine her standing in the shadows, staff in hand, eyes half closed. A woman between. Not quite a witch. Not just a healer. But something older. A Volva. Now step back inside the Viking home, low-ceilinged, warm with animal smells, full of quiet work. It's morning again. The fire crackles low. The animals have been fed, the chores are waiting. And your task today is simple, but not easy. You're going to make cheese. Without a recipe, without clean tools, and most importantly, without clean water. You begin by milking the goats, or perhaps the cow, if your family is lucky enough to have one. You sit on a low stool, chilled by the morning wind that slips in through the cracks in the turf walls. The cow is fidgety. You have to be patient. Steady hands. A steady rhythm. The milk is warm when it comes out, but it doesn't stay that way for long. And here's your first problem. How do you keep it from going bad? In the modern world, we'd chill it in a fridge. But here, in your Viking village, there's no icebox. No glass bottles. You store the milk in a clay pot, maybe lined with a bit of fat to keep it from seeping. You cover it with cloth to keep the flies out. And now you wait. But milk doesn't wait. If you leave it too long, it sours. It separates. In the summer, it curdles fast. In the winter, it freezes if you leave it too close to the wall. To turn milk into cheese, you need to curdle it on purpose, using rennet, a substance found in the stomachs of calves. You might have a little bit, dried and stored in a pouch. You crumble it into the milk, stir with a wooden spoon, and wait for it to clot. This is when the cheese is born. The curds rise. The whey settles. And you use your hands, rough, cold, often cracked from work, to scoop the curds into a cloth. You tie it. You hang it over a beam. It will drip for hours. Sometimes overnight. All this you do with no clean water. Not because you're careless, but because water is hard to come by. The stream nearby is muddy. The bucket is shared with animals. If you boil water, it costs firewood, and firewood is precious. So everything must be good enough. You rinse the cloth in water that smells faintly of moss. You clean your hands with a handful of dry grass and a splash from the basin. It's not clean by modern standards, but it will do. The cheese is soft. Tangy. Maybe a little sour. You salt it if you have salt. You press it into a wooden mold. You set it near the hearth, where it will age slowly in the warmth and smoke. This cheese won't last forever. It will be eaten within days, on bread if there's bread, or with dried fish, or on its own when the winter meals run thin and every bite matters. You don't think of it as a luxury. It's not special. It's just food. One more small victory against hunger. But cheese is tricky. Too wet and it rots. Too dry and it crumbles. Too long in the smoke and it turns bitter. You check it every day, adjust its place, turn it once or twice. You might make a joke with your brother, call it your little white calf. You might not speak at all. Just make it. Then eat it. Then start again. Because cheese, like life here, is humble. Unpolished. And just enough to keep you going. Now leave behind the farmsteads, the mountains, and the turf-roofed homes. Let's walk into a Viking city. Yes, Vikings had cities. And one of the most important and most surprising was a place the Norse called Jorvik. Today, it's known as York in England. But in the 9th and 10th centuries, it was a bustling Viking settlement, crowded, loud, busy, and yes, incredibly muddy. Imagine the sounds first. The clang of metal as a blacksmith hammers horseshoes and sword hilts. The sharp calls of women selling wool, bread, and salted fish. Children running through the lanes, bare feet splashing through puddles. Pigs squeal in pens. Chickens dart between people's legs. And under all of it, beneath the straw, the feet, the wagons, the stalls, there is mud. So much mud. Because Jorvik, like many Viking towns, wasn't paved. Its streets were dirt. Its sewers were ditches. And the weather, especially in England, didn't help. Rain fell often, pooling in ruts, mixing with waste, creating puddles that sucked at your boots and smelled like everything that had ever rotted. But still it thrived. Jorvik was a center of trade, founded when the Vikings seized York from the Anglo-Saxons around 866 CE. The invaders didn't just burn it down and leave, they stayed. Built houses, set up markets, intermarried with locals, and made it their own. Archaeologists have dug deep into the old layers of the city, and what they found is astonishing. Wooden buildings preserved in the damp soil. Leather shoes, combs made of antler, coins stamped with Viking names. Even human waste, which might sound gross, but tells us what they ate, how they lived, and what parasites they had. There were craftsmen, spinners, weavers, metalworkers. There were traders who brought silk from the east and walrus ivory from the north. There were slaves, yes, and freemen, and nobles. The city was a place of mixing, Norse, Saxon, Celtic, Frankish. Languages tangled, cultures blended. You might hear a woman shouting in Old Norse while haggling over cheese made by an English farmer. And yes, there was violence. Raids, rebellions, power struggles. But mostly it was ordinary. People worried about rising prices, broken tools, wet shoes, the smell, and the mud. Always the mud. It clung to your boots. It soaked your hem. It hid lost brooches and coins. It preserved the bones of animals and the wood of bowls. Even today, you can walk through the recreated streets of Viking Jorvik at the Jorvik Viking Center in York and see the mud brought back to life. Not the romantic version of Viking life, but the real one. A little crowded, a little smelly, a little loud, but full of people living side by side, buying, selling, arguing, laughing, and stepping always carefully around puddles. Because even in a Viking city, the mud was everywhere. And life, as always, went on. It's early morning, and already your hands are coated in soot. The hearth hasn't gone cold all night, because you are a blacksmith, and you don't have time to let the fire die. The forge must stay hot, and the work never ends. You're surrounded by tools, not the clean, modern kind, but rough hammers, iron tongs, a bellows made from animal hide, a stone anvil, and a small pit furnace. The room smells of charcoal, old sweat, scorched wool, and warm metal. The walls are stained black. Your clothes are burned through in spots. You don't mind the heat. It's the only part of your life that ever stays warm. You are the backbone of the village. No one raids, farms, cooks, or survives without your work. You make nails, horseshoes, axes, plows, door hinges, and fishing hooks. Sometimes jewelry. Sometimes swords. But most days, it's bent nails and broken hinges. And if you make a mistake, someone could die. A cracked axe head might snap in battle. A weak chain might fail on a boat. So every piece matters. But here's the problem. You have no factory, no conveyor belt, no perfect molds. You have to make everything by hand. Your iron arrives as rough chunks, dug from bogs or traded from afar. It's not pure. It's brittle or spongy or full of impurities. You hammer it flat, fold it, reheat it, and do it again. Over and over. 1,000 strikes. Each time you pull it from the fire, it glows red, orange, yellow, white. The color tells you the temperature. There's no thermometer, no timer. You judge with your eyes, your ears, your instinct. And if you get it wrong, the metal cracks, shatters, wasted. The bellows are tiring. You pump them with your foot or hand, forcing air into the coals to raise the heat high enough to soften iron. If you're lucky, someone helps. If not, it's your job too. All while standing on a floor of ash and gravel, your boots worn thin, your back aching from leaning forward. You eat quickly, some dried meat, maybe a chunk of barley bread. You drink water that's warm and slightly smoky from sitting too near the forge. There's no glamour here. Only sweat. Only noise. The clang, clang, clang of the hammer becomes part of your heartbeat. A rhythm that echoes into the bones. Sometimes, when the job is hard, the villagers gather to watch. Not to admire, but to judge. They want to see if their blade will be sharp, if their sickle will bend, if their coin mold will work. Your reputation is only as good as your last piece of iron. You try not to get frustrated, not to shout, but the work is tiring, endless, and precise. And it's dangerous. A single spark to the eye. A glowing ember against the skin. A dropped axe head on your foot. Even the smoke can make you dizzy. No one calls you a warrior. But without you, there are no warriors. No tools. No ships. No nails to hold up their houses or shoes to protect their horses. You are essential, but often unnoticed. And when you die, maybe one of your tongs will be buried with you. Or maybe just your hammer, its wooden handle blackened from years of heat. But until that day, you rise each morning, stretch your sore back, and feed the fire. Because you are the blacksmith. And the village needs you. Even if they never say thank you. Now step away from the forge, away from the steady clang of hammer on iron, and step onto a field. The air is heavy. The ground is soft beneath your boots, still wet from the morning mist. The sky is gray. Ravens circle above. It is the year 1030, and you are standing near Stiklestad in what is now Norway. Today a king will die. But not just any king. Olaf Haraldsson, called Saint Olaf by some, has returned from exile. Once a warrior, now a ruler trying to bring Christianity to his people, he is marching inland with a ragged army. His plan? To reclaim his throne. But the people are not with him. And this is where things fall apart. The story begins years earlier. Olaf had ruled Norway with a strong hand. Too strong, many thought. He was a Christian king in a mostly pagan land, and his methods were harsh. He broke up old traditions, punished rival clans, and enforced new rules from the church. He saw himself as a unifier. Many saw him as a tyrant. Eventually, he was pushed out, into exile in Russia. But kings rarely give up easily. So Olaf returned, gathering what men he could, farmers, mercenaries, old loyalists. Not many, not enough. But he believed, perhaps blindly, that he could win. The people of the land had other ideas. When they heard he was coming, they gathered their own army. Not one led by kings, but by chieftains, farmers, and former allies who had turned against him. One of them, legend says, was even his own half-brother. And so the two sides met at Stiklestad. There was no grand battlefield, no castle, just fields and hills and the clash of men who spoke the same language, wore the same woolen cloaks, and fought with the same weapons. Imagine it now. You stand shoulder to shoulder in the shield wall. The ground beneath you is churned to mud. Your hands grip a spear. Your arms ache from holding your shield in place. You can't see much, just helmets and swinging axes and brief flashes of movement through the fog. The air smells of sweat, wet leather, blood. You hear shouting, steel on steel, the cry of a man falling, and somewhere in the middle of it, Olaf. He fights fiercely. The sagas say he struck down his enemies with great strength, that he inspired those around him, that he carried the cross on his chest, even as spears rained toward him. But it wasn't enough. He was struck down, maybe by 3 men in quick succession. The saga names them, Thor the Hound, Thorstein Shipbuilder, and Kalv Arneson. One stabbed him in the leg, another in the stomach, and the last in the throat. The king fell, and with him his cause. But this is where the story takes an odd turn. After Olaf's death, strange things were reported. A blind man touched the king's blood, and claimed he could see. Flowers bloomed where he died. His body was said not to decay. And slowly, Olaf the failed king became Olaf the saint. Within a year, the church declared him holy. Pilgrims came to his grave. His image spread across Scandinavia. His enemies faded from memory, and his legacy grew. Today, Stiklestad is remembered not as a place of defeat, but of transformation, of faith, of myth, of the moment a fallen king became a symbol that would shape Norway for centuries. And if you walk that field now, you'll find no shield wall, only grass, and maybe, if you listen, the distant echo of a battle long past. Let's slow things down. Not everything in Viking life was battle, forging iron, or braving icy seas. In fact, most of it wasn't. There were no phones, no TikTok, no books you could curl up with, unless you carved the runes yourself. And so, you may ask, what did Vikings do when they got bored? The answer is quiet, ordinary, and surprisingly familiar. Let's start with the long, cold winters. Imagine you're snowed in. The sea is frozen. The sky is dark most of the day. You've already mended the nets and patched the roof. There's no more firewood to chop. The goats are asleep, and even the chickens are still. What now? You sit by the hearth. Someone starts humming. Someone else pulls out a knife and begins carving a bit of bone into a tiny horse. That's boredom, Viking style. They carved and whittled, not just tools, but toys, game pieces, combs, charms. Idle hands made things. Not always useful. Just pleasant. Just something to do. They played games. We know about Nafadafel, a Viking board game, a bit like chess, where one king tries to escape while his enemies close in. Pieces have been found carved from bone, wood, and antler, worn smooth from years of handling. Boards were scratched into tabletops or even floors. It wasn't just for nobles. Even farmers had leisure time in winter. And there were stories. Long ones. The kind that unfolded over hours, with winding heroes and dark forests and trolls and gods in disguise. Someone, often the oldest person, would tell them while stirring the stew or spinning wool. If you listen closely, you could hear the old myths again. Loki's tricks, Thor's hammer, Odin's long wanderings. Stories passed the time, but they also passed down knowledge. Children would listen with wide eyes. Grown-ups would hum in agreement. No one interrupted. And when the stories ended, there were songs. Not loud ones, soft, rhythmic songs to keep the hands moving. Songs about ships, about goats, about getting lost in the woods and making it back. Sometimes the young men would wrestle outside on warmer days, testing strength in the snow, or try their hands at throwing stones or axes or even bones. And when all else failed, they slept. A lot. Winter nights were long, and sleep was often broken into two parts. First sleep and second sleep. In between, people would whisper, pray, think, or just lie still. Boredom had its own rhythm. And here's the truth. Boredom wasn't always bad. It was a space, a quiet space where your hands could rest, your thoughts could wander, and time moved slowly. So when someone today says, Vikings were always fighting, you can smile and remember. They also sat by the fire and carved tiny birds from antler. They waited for the snow to melt. They whispered poems to the dark. And they got bored just like you. But in those quiet hours, they created things that still survive 1,000 years later. Not bad for a people with no Wi-Fi. Let's return once again to daily life. To your body. To your smell. Because in the Viking world, you do bathe. You do comb your hair. You even clean under your nails. But here's the truth. You still smell. Not because you're dirty by Viking standards, but because your world is filled with things that cling to skin. Smoke, sweat, fish, and wet wool. Let's begin in the morning. You wake up inside your longhouse. The air is thick with the smell of last night's fire. There's no chimney, just a hole in the roof, so the smoke hangs in the beams and in your hair. You pull on your tunic, made of rough wool, probably never fully washed. Maybe it was rinsed in the river. Maybe not. You shake it out, and the scent rises, a little earthy, a little sheepy. You splash your face with cold water from a wooden bucket. Not because it's clean, but because it's cold. You scrub with a bit of sand or ash. There's no soap, not like you'd know today. Maybe a touch of lard or oil if you're lucky. Then you reach for your comb. That's right. Nearly every Viking we've ever dug up has one. Combs were common, made from bone, antler, or wood. Some were simple. Others were decorated with swirls and runes. You comb your hair slowly, carefully. Lice are a constant problem, and combing helps. It also shows pride. Your hair matters. Your beard matters. Vikings were known for it. Not wild, unkempt hair, but styled hair, braided and trimmed, especially among the wealthy. Some even dyed their beards using lye to get a lighter color. You might apply fat or oil to make it shine. You check your teeth. There's no toothpaste, but you might chew herbs, mint, yarrow, or even charcoal. Your breath still isn't great, though. Now the clothes. You wear layers, wool, linen if you're lucky, leather if it's cold. All of it smells. Not awful, just strong. Like fire. Like farm. Like life. And shoes. They're damp. They're made of leather that's been worn thin by weeks of mud. You line them with straw or fur, but they never really dry out. Still, you've done what you can. And in this world, you're clean. But here's the thing, the bar is different. The water is never perfectly clean. Your soap is harsh, if you even have it. Your towels are reused. Your bedding is shared. Your nails are scrubbed, but dirt lingers in the corners. You wash your hands, but there's always smoke, grease, or blood from a butchered goat. You wash your hair once a week, maybe. More if you live near a river, less if the snow's too deep. And yet, compared to your neighbors in England or France, you're practically spotless. In fact, when Vikings settled in England, the locals complained that they bathed too much. Once a week. Scandalous. Vikings cared about appearance. Jewelry. Grooming. Looking good mattered, especially at the thing, or when meeting a potential spouse. Still, no matter what you do, the smell of Viking life is always with you. Smoke from the hearth. Sweat from wool. Fish oil from the coast. Cheese aging on the shelf. The smell of people crowded into a longhouse. Of animals kept indoors during winter. You try your best, but this world is wet, hot, clothes, and even the cleanest Viking still smells like a Viking. Let's imagine something bigger now. You're not just building a fence, not a shed, not a turf-roofed family hut tucked into a hill. You're building a mead hall, a massive wooden structure at the center of your village. A place for feasts, meetings, songs, and shelter. A place of stories, drink, warmth, and a lot of mess. Let's begin with the build. The first step? Wood. So much wood. You walk into the forest with your axe. Not a modern one, but a heavy iron blade with a wooden handle. You choose tall, straight trees. Pine, oak, ash. You cut them down one by one. Each tree takes hours. Sometimes a full day. Then comes shaping. You strip the bark, trim the branches, and split the logs. Some will become beams. Others planks. Some are carved into pegs, because nails are rare and expensive. You fit everything together by hand, using joinery that creaks but holds. No sawmills. No screws. Just tools, sweat, and time. And always more mud. As the frame rises, so does the smell of damp earth and wet wood. You pile stone at the base to keep rot away. The walls go up. Sometimes logs laid sideways, sometimes planks fastened upright. Then the roof. It's steep, tall, and heavy. Inside, it curves like the belly of a ship. You thatch it with reeds or sod. Layers and layers of straw packed tight, sometimes sealed with tar. It's dark inside. Smoky. Warm in winter, but barely. There are no windows. Just one or two holes in the roof to let out smoke, and let in the rain. And the floor? Dirt. Packed hard from feet and spilled drink. There are benches. Tables. Animal skins hung on walls. Shields, swords, carved poles with faces that might represent gods, or just old warriors. And when it's finally finished, after weeks, maybe months, you invite everyone in. The mead is poured, and the mess begins. Cleaning a mead hall is a job no one envies. After every feast, you sweep bones off the floor. Scrape fish scales from the tables. Mop up spilled ale with handfuls of straw. There are greasy plates made from wood, sticky fingers, a forgotten bowl of turnips under the bench. And people don't just eat here. They sleep here. Snore here. Sometimes fight here. They sweat, spill, snore, argue, and eat with their hands. The hearth in the center is always burning. It leaves ash, soot, and a film of smoke on everything. Your hair, your cloak, your bread. The roof leaks in spring. Rats sneak in through the eaves. Flies buzz over every salted fish. You sweep daily. You spread fresh rushes or hay on the floor. You empty buckets of waste out the back. You air out the blankets, if it's warm enough. But it never feels fully clean. Still, it's the heart of your world, where laws are spoken, songs are shared, guests are welcomed. Bragging, bargaining, and betrothals happen here. It's where you meet your neighbors, hear your chieftain, and drink until your troubles soften. You built it with your hands. You clean it with your back bent. You live half your life inside it. And even with the smell, the mud, the noise, and the cracked beams, it is home. Now close your eyes and picture this. You've left Norway behind, sailed west across the open sea. And after days of gray skies and endless waves, you see it. A jagged line of land. Black cliffs. Smoking hills. green valleys tucked between stone. This is Iceland. It's the late 800s, and you're among the first Norse settlers to arrive. You expected good land, open space, a fresh start, but what you get is a strange, wild island that is beautiful and difficult. The ground steams in places. There are bubbling pools, hot to the touch. The rivers run fast and icy. The wind never really stops. And when you dig into the earth to plant barley, nothing. Just ash and stone. This is a land of lava. Volcanoes shape everything. They've burned forests, redirected rivers, even buried entire farms. Earthquakes shake your home in the night. One morning, you find the spring has turned sulfurous, too foul to drink. And yet you stay. You build turf houses, half sunk into hills, to protect against the cold. You graze sheep on the tough, scrubby grass. You gather driftwood, since the trees are scarce. You fish in freezing waters. You make do. But it's not just the earth that's rough. It's the lice. Tiny, biting things that live in your clothes, your bed, your hair. They're impossible to escape. You boil your linen, you comb your scalp with bone combs, but they always return. You scratch at night. You joke about them with your neighbors, but you never get rid of them. Everyone has them, even the chieftains. It's just part of life here. You heat your home with peat and dung. You eat dried fish and sour milk. You recite poetry by firelight to chase off the long dark. You record names, family lines, because in this place, family is everything. And the weather does not care. The winters come fast. Snow piles against your door. Sheep die. Crops fail. You huddle close. You eat what you saved. Sometimes you eat less than you need. But you write. Yes, this strange, isolated land becomes a place of stories. In Iceland, more than anywhere, the old tales are preserved. Here, the sagas are born, quiet, powerful stories of family feuds, outlaw heroes, women who take revenge, and ghosts that wander the hills. They are written down later, of course, once writing arrives. But the memory lives here, kept alive through generations, whispered in longhouses over bowls of broth. This is a land of hardship, but also a land of survival, and strangely freedom. No kings rule here. The people govern themselves through the Althing, one of the oldest parliaments in the world. Men speak their grievances. Women sometimes too. Laws are recited from memory. Justice is slow, but it is spoken aloud. And even when the lava flows, even when the lice bite, even when winter tightens its grip, the people stay. Because Iceland is harsh. But it is theirs. A land of lava. A land of lice. A land of law, story, and quiet strength. Now let's talk about something many imagine when they think of Vikings. A detail you've seen in movies, games, and books. Tattoos. Dark swirls across the skin. Knots and runes on arms, faces, and necks. Mysterious markings full of meaning. Worn by warriors. By raiders. By women of power. But the question is, did Vikings really have tattoos? And the honest answer is, we're not sure. No Viking body has been found with skin intact. Time, weather, and burial customs have erased nearly every chance of seeing ink. What we know comes from hints, from a few lines in old texts, from comparisons with other cultures. Let's begin with the one written clue we have. A 10th century Arab traveler named Ahmad ibn Fadlan visited the Rus, a group of Norse traders who had settled along rivers in what is now Russia. He wrote, "They are tattooed from the tips of their fingers to their necks with dark green trees and other figures." That's the only first-hand account we have. And even that has problems. Were these tattoos? Or painted designs? Was the color really green? Or did the translator misinterpret blue-black ink? And were the Rus still culturally Viking by then? It's hard to say. But the idea stuck. And it makes sense, in a way. The Norse loved art. They carved detailed knotwork into wood, bone, and metal. They wore brooches shaped like dragons, pendants etched with runes. Even their swords were decorated. So why not the skin? There are some clues if we look sideways. Iron Age people across northern Europe used needle tattooing with soot or charcoal. Some Siberian mummies, frozen in ice, have tattoos of animals and symbols that date back centuries before the Viking Age. Even the Picts, tribes in Scotland known to the Norse, were said to paint or tattoo their bodies. So the idea isn't strange. But what would a Viking tattoo if they had one? Maybe the hammer of Thor, worn on the arm as a sign of protection. Maybe the Vegvisor, a magical compass, though that symbol appears in later Icelandic sources. Maybe names. Maybe family symbols. Or maybe nothing we can guess at. If they did have tattoos, they were likely made with simple tools. A bone needle, ink made from ash and fat, pressed into the skin slowly and painfully. The designs would be basic, crude by today's standards, but meaningful. It's also possible that tattoos were not common at all. Maybe only among warriors. Maybe only among slaves. Maybe only in certain regions. And we must be careful not to assume too much. Because many of the images we have today, blue-eyed men with full-face tattoos, women with runes across their cheeks, come from modern imagination. From shows and comics. Not from archaeology. Still, it's not hard to imagine. A man preparing for battle, marking his arm with ink to remind himself of his ancestors. A woman tracing a line around her wrist in memory of a lost child. A quiet mark hidden under wool. A symbol of protection or grief or pride. We may never know for sure. But in a world of sharp iron, deep winters, and hard lives, a mark on the skin might have been one small thing you could choose for yourself. And maybe that was reason enough. Let's step away from battlefields and longships now, and walk into something quieter, but just as important. A place where voices rise instead of swords. Where justice is spoken, not shouted. This is the thing, the Viking assembly. And here we explore Viking law. Harsh, but fair. Well, sometimes. You're standing in a wide, open field. People have gathered from nearby farms, some from villages further out. It's not a courtroom with walls and judges, it's just an open-air space, maybe near a hill or a sacred tree. There are no chairs, no gavels, no wigs. But there is order. The law is spoken, not written. One person, called the law speaker, has memorized it all. Years of legal codes, rules, and customs. He stands before the crowd and recites it aloud. Every year, word for word. Because if you don't speak the law, it fades. If you don't remember it, it disappears. Now, Viking law wasn't about catching criminals. It was about keeping the community balanced. If someone stole your sheep, or broke your fence, or insulted your honor, you didn't call the police. You brought them to the thing. There, people argued. Witnesses spoke. Oaths were sworn. If someone was found guilty, they might be fined. Not jailed. Fines were everything. A detailed chart listed what every injury or crime cost. A broken tooth? A fine. A cut on the cheek? A fine. Killing a man? A much bigger fine, called a wergild, or man price. But what if someone refused to pay? Then they could be outlawed. To be outlawed meant you had no legal protection. Anyone could kill you, and no one would be punished. You were cast out, made invisible to the law. Some went into hiding. Some begged forgiveness. Some didn't survive. It wasn't always fair. The rich could afford the fines. The poor couldn't. Women could go to the thing, but often needed a male relative to speak for them. Slaves? They had almost no rights. If one was killed, the owner was paid, not the person. Still, the thing gave people a voice. It was also a place of gathering. Trade. Marriage. Celebration. Poets performed. Merchants sold goods. Children ran through the grass while their parents debated over land. And the law grew with the people. As Christianity spread, new rules came. No working on Sundays. No eating horse meat. Old customs faded. New punishments appeared. But the bones of Viking law remained. Balance. Speech. Reputation. If you were wronged, you didn't strike back. You brought your case. If someone challenged you, you stood your ground, not with weapons, but with words. And the thing decided. Not perfectly. Not gently. But with a kind of justice that held the Viking world together. One voice at a time. Let's walk now into a story told many times. A woman stands in armor, wind sweeping through her hair. She grips a round shield, a sword at her side. She rides into battle, not behind the lines, but beside the men. She is a shield maiden. But the question is, did she ever truly exist? Or is she a legend, born from saga, not soil? The answer is complicated. Let's start with the sagas, Icelandic stories written down in the 13th and 14th centuries. In them, we meet women like Brynhildr, Lagertha, and Herveyr. They fight, lead, and carry weapons like warriors. Herveyr even walks alone to a haunted island to speak to her dead father's ghost and claim his sword. These stories are bold, beautiful, but sagas are not history. They're literature. Epic, symbolic, often written centuries after the events they describe. Still, they reflect something deeper, perhaps not exact facts, but cultural memory. Then there are the myths. Norse mythology is full of powerful women. The Valkyries, choosing who lives and dies in battle. Freya, goddess of love and war. Skadi, the huntress of the mountains. Again, these are not real people, but they show that Norse culture didn't always push women to the background. The line between myth and reality was often soft. But what about archaeology? For a long time, Viking graves with weapons were simply labeled male. Sword, man. Axe, man. Shield, definitely a man. Until recently, in Birka, Sweden, a famous Viking warrior grave was discovered, buried with a full set of weapons, 2 horses, and a game board. For decades, it was assumed to be male. But in 2017, DNA testing revealed something surprising. The warrior was female. This sparked huge debate. Some cheered. Finally, proof of a real shield maiden. Others pushed back. Was she truly a warrior, or just buried with symbols of one? And that's the heart of it. We don't know what her life was like. We don't know if she trained for battle, or inherited the role, or held status in another way. One grave can't tell the whole story, but it does raise powerful questions. Other graves have since turned up with similar hints. Women buried with axes, spears, armor. Not many, but not zero either. Could some women have fought? Probably. Could some have led raids? Possibly. But was it common? Likely not. Most Viking women were farmers, mothers, traders, or caretakers. They ran households, defended homes when men were gone. They had rights, more than women in much of medieval Europe. But war was still mostly a man's world. So where does that leave the shield maiden? Half truth, half dream, a whisper from the sagas, a possibility from the earth, a figure who may not have marched in great numbers, but who marched through memory all the same. And sometimes history leaves space for stories we still want to believe. You are on the sea now, not a quiet lake or a sunny bay, but the cold, gray expanse of the North Sea. And overhead, the wind shifts. It doesn't begin with thunder. It begins with silence. The sky changes. The gulls disappear. The light turns pale and strange. You've seen this before. It's not your first voyage. But this time it feels different. You grip the side of your Nar, a Viking cargo ship, wider and heavier than a warship, but still only wood and rope and sail. Around you, other men shift nervously. They look to the sky, to the sail, to the water. And then, the wind arrives. Not a breeze. A punch. Sudden. Cold. Sharp. The sail cracks. The mast groans. Water sprays over the sides. Someone yells something, but the wind rips their voice away. You're no stranger to storms. Vikings sail with skill. You know the stars, the coastlines, the shape of the waves. You've crossed the sea before, between Norway, Denmark, the British Isles, even Iceland. But in a storm, the sea is no one's friend. You scramble to lower the sail, too late. The rope snaps like a whip. The boat lurches sideways. Water pours in over the edge, soaking your cloak, your boots, your beard. Your fingers go numb. Still, you work. The oars come out. Not to go forward, just to steer. To survive. You take your turn, muscles burning. The waves are too high to see over. One moment the sky, the next a wall of black water. You bail water with a bucket. You pray. Or maybe you curse. And the ship creaks with every wave, wood swollen, ropes straining, pegs bending. Everything is soaked. You wonder if the caulking will hold. You remember which cargo is tied down. You think about the goats. One of them is bleeding. You feel it more than hear it. Just a small voice in the storm. You think of home. Of the longhouse. The fire. The smell of peat smoke. Of your wife plucking lice from your tunic. Of your son asking about the gods. You wonder if you'll see them again. This is what the sagas don't tell you. That the glory of sailing also meant shivering until your teeth ached. That the call of far-off lands meant days soaked to the skin. That the power of nature humbled even the bravest men. Eventually, slowly, the storm begins to pass. Not all at once. The rain lingers. The sea still heaves. But the wind softens and the dark lifts just a little. You bail the last of the water. You check the sail. You eat some dried fish. Chewy, salty, a little wet from the spray. You survived. This time. And the sea, which looked like your enemy just hours ago, now looks calm again. But you know better. The North Sea doesn't forgive. It doesn't forget. And it will be waiting next time. Now step back into time, even further. Before the raids. Before the longships. Before you could lift a shield or throw a spear. You are a child. A Viking child. But this is not childhood as you know it today. There are no toys from the market. No schools. No soft pillows embroidered with your name. Your world is made of wood and wool, ash and cold breath. And from the moment you're born, you are expected to survive. But not all do. Infant death is common, perhaps even the norm. The winters are long. The food is rough. Disease moves quickly in a crowded longhouse. A fever, a cough, a bad harvest. Any one of these might end your life before your second year. So when you cry out and draw breath, your mother wraps you in furs and whispers thanks to the gods. You are here. For now. If you live beyond infancy, you work. By age 5, you feed the goats, gather kindling, and stir pots of barley. You carry water in a leather bucket. You learn the rhythms of the home. When to rise, when to hush, when to listen. If you're a girl, you shadow your mother, grandmother, or aunt. You learn to spin, to sew, to care for younger siblings, to brew ale. If you're a boy, you follow your father. You learn to tend the fields, shape wood, mend nets, and eventually to fight. But even then, play is not forgotten. You carve little boats from scraps of driftwood. You toss knucklebones, race across muddy fields, play mock battles with sticks. Sometimes the older children teach you riddles, or help you memorize lines from sagas. You mimic the chants of the skalds, trying to sound grown-up. And sometimes you are quiet, watching, learning. By age 12, everything changes. You may be married if you're a girl. Not a game of dress-up, a real union. You leave your home and step into a new one, often far away. You are expected to manage a household, bear children, carry secrets. If you're a boy, you may be sent to another farm to work as a foster. Not just to help out, but to train, to build relationships, to toughen. You may even go on your first voyage. By 15 or so, you are an adult. There is no in-between. No teenage years of waiting. You are married, working, raiding, mothering, sailing, farming. Childhood in the Viking world is short. And yet, it's not joyless. There is laughter around the fire, soft woolen dolls sewn by a sister, stories told at bedtime. There are moments of stillness, watching the sky turn orange, listening to birds, feeling warm bread in your hand. But it is never easy. Because in this world, every child is one bad winter from vanishing. Every illness a risk. Every injury a threat. The ones who grow strong are praised. The ones who fall behind are mourned quietly, and life moves on. And so you rise early. You walk the goat path barefoot. You try to listen well, because the world does not wait for you to grow up. In the Viking age, you are a child, and then suddenly, you are not. And now we come to the end. Not just the end of this story, but the end of an age. Because the Viking world didn't end with a crash. There was no final battle. No moment when the last longship sailed, and everyone waved goodbye. Instead, it faded. Quietly. Gradually. Almost without the Vikings realizing it themselves. For 300 years, Norse men and women shaped Europe. They traded silk in Constantinople, built kingdoms in Ireland, settled Iceland and Greenland, and touched the shores of North America. They were farmers, raiders, poets, and kings. But by the late 11th century, the sails were lowering. Why? First, Christianity. It came slowly through missionaries and kings. It didn't replace the old gods overnight, but it changed the Viking way of life. The rituals, the burial customs, the laws. Suddenly, Odin and Thor were no longer part of public ceremony. Temples were torn down, churches rose in their place. Burial ships were replaced with graves marked by crosses. The old songs became sins. The old stories, myths to be forgotten. And along with the gods, something else began to fade. The independence. The world grew more organized. Kings gained power. Central governments formed. Laws became more strict, more uniform. Raiding, once a way of life, became piracy, illegal and punishable by death. Then came the money. Nations like England and France learned to pay off raiders, or better, hire them. Former Vikings became guards, mercenaries, landowners. They gained power, yes, but lost their identity in the process. And then the climate changed. The weather grew colder, harsher. Greenland's farms failed. Iceland's growing season shrank. Settlements that once held promise now struggled just to survive. Trade routes shifted. Ships stopped coming. The great mead halls fell into disuse. And the people, they didn't vanish. They simply changed. They married locals. They adopted new names, new beliefs, new ways of dressing and thinking. Over generations, the Norse world became something else. Not gone, just transformed. The children of raiders became merchants. The grandchildren of skalds became monks. And no one noticed the exact day the Viking Age ended. There were no trumpets, no tombstones, Only silence. And perhaps that is how history often moves. Not with fire, but with fog. So now, as you lay here, safe in your bed, far from longships and lice and the roar of storms, remember that even the most fearsome empires do not explode. They erode, and in time their sharp edges smooth. Their legends drift. Their names become stories whispered before sleep.